Welcome back, future devs, to the final video in this series on becoming a pro concept artist. We have covered everything from composition to values to perspective to shape language, and now we are moving on to color. Color is an interesting one and a really fun one. I think for the most part everybody will love this series. I've broken up the video into, I think will be pretty much 3 parts. They're going to be fairly quick. I'm going to go over some basic templates you can follow in order to create interesting color scenarios. And then I'm going to go over 2 types of tricks that I learned over the years that will dramatically change the way your art looks and just kind of adds that juicy effect to it. So without further ado, I'll jump right in. The core 5 color schemes that I grabbed are Monochromatic, Complementary, Analogous, Split Complementary, and Triadic. These 5, I think, cover a pretty wide range of scenarios you can find in art, and I will go over them one at a time. So monochromatic is basically a color scheme that is mono, one dominant color, and it doesn't mean you can't break rules with any of these, but for the most part monochromatic looks something a bit like this. You have one dominant color. It's pretty straightforward. It's probably what I think you should try doing first to kind of get your feet wet with playing with color, because these aren't always monochromatic, that it is absolutely from red to black, or let's say from blue to black. You have blue and it'll shift around a little bit. You can see on this scale right here, it moves around a tiny bit, because when you go into shadows, you don't want to go straight down into black, and that's actually going to be one of the things I cover. But for the most part, these are monochromatic. The same thing goes with this. I know that this is going to be more of a yellow, and then over here it's dipping into deeper reds, but this is still very much a monochromatic scheme. So next on the list is complementary, and complementary was probably one of the first times I understood that color, you can really play with color. And all complementary means is opposite on the color wheel. So if you were to have a dark blue, your complementary color would be yellow. If you were to have this orangish color, it'd be more of the sky blue. If it's going to be red, it's more of a pure green. And again, these things can change a little bit. You can have a complementary color system where it goes something like this, and it's that and not this. But there are general rules of thumb. The best way to look at these color systems is that they're just guides to kind of help you create variation. Just like in the shape language series, if you've not seen that, it's good to think of medium, big to small, you know, pokey to round. The same thing goes with color. When you're playing with color, you want to actually really have a concise idea of what you're trying to sell, right? So these are kind of nice tips for having organized systems that you're like, oh, I'd like to have a primarily warm environment with spots of green, and I know those will kind of work together because they're mirrors of each other in terms of the color spectrum. So complementary, you can see this plays by the rules of complementary, but it's not necessarily like 100%. So you have your, looks like you have your red, right? And then you have your green. And that green in this image actually comes in a few different flavors. Honestly dips a little bit over into this spectrum, but it's pretty much a complementary. You can say it's about like that. With this image, again, the primary colors would be an orange, right? You'd have your orange, and you have a bluish and a green. So your monochromatic system, I'm sorry, I'm saying monochromatic, your complementary system would be connecting about like that. So moving on, we have analogous, and analogous are really cool because analogous are really just a nice grouping of colors, and this can be anywhere on the color wheel. Again, these aren't tied to red and green. This can be, you know, you can have a analogous color group that is, you know, your cools. I primarily actually paint with an analogous group of probably this spectrum, maybe this spectrum. You can have an analogous group where you have these two and it skips one. You know, you can play around, but think of systems like this to help you really pull out interesting colors. So a good example for an analogous system is this right here. So what's cool is the subtleties matter, right? I know these are bright, vibrant colors, but this is your blue, right? That's kind of, well, I guess, yeah, that's your blue, and then you have a green, and then you have a yellow. If I was to crank the values up on this, you know, you can see that it's actually a true blue, but they're very muted. So once you kind of start to play with these color systems, you can mute things back. Everything doesn't have to be so toy-like, so childish, and that's something I actually really struggled with. Is I was so new to these color systems that everything I did was bright and vibrant because I wanted to like express that I was using good colors, but sometimes they're not always so noticeable and so dramatic, and that can actually create a little bit more of sophisticated art. Next on the list we have split complementary, and this is actually just kind of a cooler variation of complementary. What it does is it uses the side colors to the color straight across from your primary color, and what that's going to do is that's going to introduce a little bit more variation. Good example for that, actually I should have hidden that one. Good example for this one is, so you have your green, right? And then you have your oranges, and again, I'm getting a little bit more, they're a lot less noticeable in these, but this would be a split complementary colors, because you are coming from basically, this is your color system right here. Even though they're muted, right? They're still respecting these systems. This is actually a piece I did, and it's interesting because I paint and I don't necessarily think about these systems that much anymore. I kind of have an idea of what colors work together, and I think it was funny making this video. I think it's actually important to really reference these systems, because I think you can get a lot more out of your art if you are being direct with your colors. If you're really going, okay, what is the theme I'm trying to convey? Is it calm and serene? So maybe blues, greens, and like oranges, or is it really high intense? So I might be using pinks and reds and maybe also yellows, depending on the color combination. So it's really important to know the theme you're trying to convey and possibly push the colors in that direction. So with this piece, we have blues and pinks, and then the face is a yellow, and a little bit of that is referenced in the hair as well. So this would be the shape of your split complementary colors. This one was actually a really difficult one, and let's see if I can even remember what I see. A blue, and I see a green, and then I see a like reddish. So this one was interesting. This could almost be monochromatic as well, but I tried to see if I could pull it apart in a split complementary color. So this would be a green, yeah, a green, a blue, and a red. So they're so subdued that it's almost hard to see it, but you can see how they still follow that system. And then lastly, we have the Triadic color scheme, and those are cool as well. And this one I really pushed to find stuff that is absolutely subtle. And so what I see here is we have, I'd say your most vibrant colors are this blue right here, these greens, really interesting greens, and the art gets really beautiful when you start to play with subtleties like this. It becomes so much more mature. And then you have these oranges all in the sand, right? So I pretty much saw it as this combination right here. And of course, you know, you're not this vibrant, but that's pretty much the theme here, and it stays true all throughout. So yeah, these are the systems you guys can play with. I would really start simple. For the longest time, I did everything blue and orange. That was like the trending colors of concept art about 5 years, and everything I did had blue and orange. And it gets a little boring, but as you start to kind of get used to those systems, you can experiment a little bit. And again, there is no wrong color coordination. You can mix and match any saturations, any hues you want, but these are nice ways to think about how to get some mileage out of the full color wheel and really split things up. I think there was another one. Here we go. This one's a great example of having everything in the color wheel, but the priorities of those colors are different. So for this one, this is Triadic again. This one is really interesting because it is primarily red, 45% blue, and then just a sprinkle of yellow, right? And this one's actually off center, but that's okay. It lives within this zone. And that's a really interesting way to do your art. So you don't have to evenly distribute your colors. On top of that, you can go, this is going to be it's pretty much a complementary or an analogous colored image, but because it lives within this spectrum right here, I know I can sprinkle some yellow on it and it'll be very harmonious to the rest of the image. So you can create hierarchies with those colors. You can have 90% blue and then just hints of red everywhere, and then just a speckle or two of yellow. You can actually see that there is quite a bit of green in this image. And that's what that's doing, is that's basically creating almost a smaller art piece that says, okay, I'm gonna have complementary colors going on here, and then over here I'm gonna have analogous colors with the deep reds and the yellows, but they all still play to this larger hierarchy of a system. So that is pretty much the entirety of well, not the entirety, there's a lot more configuration you can work with, but this is, I think, the core set that you can really get you going with playing with color. The last two things I wanted to talk about was how to lay down color, and this is actually a little bit more about rendering, and just one really big tip that everybody has to know, and then two other little tips that I think are really important. So the rule is never to use black or white. And that might sound weird, right? Because when you're shadowing something, let's say you are painting a fleshy surface, right? You want to have skin. And the most obvious thing to do would be like, okay, it's going to shadow, so I drag downward, right? And as it gets darker, I just drag deeper into black, right? And that makes sense because it's getting darker in shadow. But shadows don't actually work like that. Shadows actually have a lot of bounce light, and a lot of that bounce light comes from the sky. And what happens is you get this influence of light. Actually, I'll just leave that there. You get this influence, so I'll do a new skin sphere. And it's really important to play with your colors. Anytime you have the chance to basically play with colors, do it. Like, run with making things a million different colors if you can, because what it's really going to do is it's going to create interest in your art. So instead of just going to blacks, you'll never, basically keep this rule forever, never go to black. If you do that, your art has instantly leveled up. You are more sophisticated as an artist because you don't go to blacks. A sophisticated artist goes to blues and purples and cools. So anytime you're going into shadows, make sure you go into cools. Anytime you go into lights, use warms, because it's reminiscent of the sun, and it gives that feeling of an actual light source. That's a horrible yellow, but we can run with it. And so that is rule number one. And this rule, for the most part, I'm going to tell you, until you're basically an absolute pro artist, this rule never gets broken. You don't ever use grays or blacks to render your materials ever. It looks flat. Like, if you look at like pictures of like a Barbie doll or toys, this is what happens to their skin, right? There's just nothing going on. But with humans, when the light goes into their skin, it refracts all around underneath their skin, underneath the blood vessels, and it comes back out a little bit warmer. when you have color, like if you have a brick wall, right? Oops, let's turn that off. If you have a brick wall and the sun is shining on it, don't just use a lighter brick color, right? Bring some warm, bring some rich tones into it. Play with the color wheel as much as you can, and really, like, even if it's just a little bit that you're amping up the colors, it adds so much to it. Especially like when shadows happen, you get these like really beautiful cools. Like I will add, what I usually do is I mix right on my image, and I'll pull like the fringes, pull the fringe again. Yeah, and you get this nice cool effect. And then where the light meets the dark, you can add this awesome glow effect that really adds like this extra level where it looks like the light is so bright on the brick that it's kind of bleeding up underneath the brick. So from now on, you will no longer use grays or whites to lighten or darken your surfaces. Play with cools for shadows, warms for your highlights. The second rule I wanted to talk to you guys about was how you get from one color to the next. When I started doing art, I basically was like, okay, this is going to go from red to blue. So to go from red to blue, I'm going to simply just drag down through the color wheel until I get to blue. But I found that my art wasn't looking how I wanted it to. I wasn't quite getting to blue. Like I didn't want to go through pink to get to blue. And that almost makes no sense. How do you get from red to blue without ever touching pink? What you do, and this is a really cool, you can actually look this up online, there's a way to navigate this space that allows you to get to blue without ever touching pink. And what actually happens is, because our eyes see color relatively, if I was just to stay on full red and start going over here towards more of a gray, gray is perceived as more of a cool. And then what I can do is I can start to actually bring the color wheel towards pink, lay another one down again, go a little bit grayer and darker, lay another one down again, and then we can now start to bring the saturation back to the more saturated colors as we get to blue. And something really awesome happens that like your eyes will perceive that as just a shift from red to blue. It's all about using grays to your advantage. So if you want to start getting a little more sophisticated, stay off this edge when it comes to transitioning from one color to the next. If you want it to be high key, if you're doing some really bright Neo Tokyo kind of looking art, some cyberpunk stuff, this is more reasonable. But if you're trying to do a little bit more sophisticated transitions from colors, you can actually dip into gray and use that as you're shifting into cools. The same thing goes from green to red. You can shift from, if you look at this green, it actually does the reverse where it starts to literally look like it's turning to a red. It's a really interesting tool you can use. So that is the second rule. The last one was actually a really interesting thing that I had. It was almost like I needed an excuse to make good art. And so I'm going to give you guys the excuse to make good art as well. And you don't have to wait years to almost feel like you need permission. When you look at basically all of these pieces, I looked at the art and I just thought, wow, I wish I could have color like this in my art. It's just so beautiful and vibrant. Like one day when I'm an established artist, you know, I'll have these colors in my art too. And it was really weird that I thought that like there was some sort of like, when you hit level 40 as an artist, these colors start to come out in your art. And what I realized was that there's nothing more happening than this artist creating their flower, and they lay down their paints, and they know, well, what is a good complementary color to green? Oh, red is. And they literally lay these colors in here. Like, these aren't accidental. I guess the moral of this is, if you want to have beautiful colors in your art, simply put the colors in there. These aren't mistakes. These aren't the artifacts of just expressive artists just letting out their their awesome goo of talent. They're simply going, I know what works on a canvas, and I'm going to replicate that. And all you have to do is look at art you like and go, oh my god, I love how they put those pinks in there. I'm just going to simply do that. And that's all the excuse you need. You look at these pieces and, you know, if you were to go in and go, oh, you want these towers and they'll be orange and maybe they'll get like black at the top, that's where you'd stop, right? And you'd have these towers and they look good. And then you look at other art and you go, God, I wish I could do colors like that. But it's simply going, well, I'll just do colors like that. You'll just throw in variations. Make sure you play with the color spectrum. Like if it's orange, keep it orange, but play with variations and add those tweaks, add those highlights. And it just adds a sophistication to your art very quickly. And there's no rules to it. There's nothing you have to like achieve in order to allow you to do this. You just simply do it and your art will be better for it. So I can go through a few of these and we can kind of just gawk at them because they're pretty incredible. This one actually stays pretty orange and greenish, but you can see how they even shift. They shift a lot into yellows here, and that's a very conscious decision. They could have, it's lazier to just color pick the colors that are already in your environment, but they chose to go to yellows here, and then there's greens here, and then blues here. So really playing with that color wheel, even if it's subtly, you can just add jitter to your colors, and it creates a lot more interest in your art. This piece is incredible. This has the entire rainbow in it, and it's like, again, you have this white sail, right? I'd have this white sail, like level 1 artist is like, oh, I'll have a white sail, but instead of going to a gray, you know, I'll have it go to a nice, you know, cool color. But then they went as far as going, you know what, I want to have these orange pops on the edges of it. And this is not an accident. Again, these are purposefully placed colors. Like look up here, this is all purposeful. Like none of this was by accident. None of this is like an underpainting. This was done to add extra visual interest, and that's it. So that is your tool. That is something you should be doing with your art if you want your art to feel and look like this type of art. Again, this is actually a traditional piece, and this is a undertone showing through. They probably primed their canvas with a red and painted on top of it. But the same thing holds true. They let those colors bleed through because they like the way it looked. There is no magic tricks here. It's simply, I know this looks good. It's consistent. All artists do it. They add the reds and the rich blues and they just touch up their paintings. Everybody does it. And you need no excuse to do it as well. And it's just very weird because I spent a really long time admiring this art, but feeling like I wasn't allowed to do it until I reached some strange level as an artist. Here, this is a little bit more subtle, but you can see how, you know, they went from grays to more blues to even richer stuff, and there's just pops and variations. So that is yours to own, guys. Make sure you really utilize that. And yeah, I think that covers everything, at least the general sense of getting started with color. I think I'll actually add a last video to this series, and what it's going to be is it's going to be me putting together everything I've talked about, and it'll basically be a speed painting, and I'll probably just speed it up to like 20x and talk over it, and it'll kind of just recap on everything and show off with what you can do with these tools and how far you can really push your art. And I'll try my best to explain exactly what it is I'm thinking. Maybe if you guys want to suggest a theme or something, I'm best at environments, so something like that could be really cool. And then lastly, before I end the video, I will be opening a Discord for people to talk and share ideas with. I'm kind of still figuring out how I want to structure it. I think I actually might have chat rooms or channels based on each category, so we can all share art that inspires us and things we learned about each category, and really let it almost let it run itself, so you guys can help each other and share resources and things like that. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful, and yeah, I'm excited to do a painting for you guys in the next video. So take care. Bye.